This session would be for about 2 hours. The way we would run this session would be I would give a presentation, but the thing is I would ensure that you would have opportunities to ask as we move through the to ask questions as we move through the presentation. So at key points of the presentation, I would pause for questions, right? That would probably like go on for about 60 minutes or so, right? Then I would break you up into 3 groups, just like what we did yesterday, where you would be discussing one question each. Each group will be discussing a different question with respect to teacher professional development, right? And then after that, we probably would have about 20 to 30 minutes of the breakout session. You would be broken up into groups, um, like it will not be based on the country level. So it is quite likely that in a group, you might have participants from different countries, right? And then eventually after the breakout session, we will come back to the main room again, just for each group to be reporting back, right? So this is the plan that we have for this 2-hour session. The title of this session is Technology and Pedagogy, and it is for us to envision teacher professional development. I would say more of beyond disruption, right, or post-pandemic. Um, you might want to call me either Chirp or Chirping. Chirp is my nickname, right? Because if you take a look at my English name, Chirping, right? It sounds like the English words bird chirping. So from a really young age, I've always been called Chirp. Um, right? I'm a chair professor of learning technologies and innovation, right? And I'm based in the Education University of Hong Kong, right? If you could actually detect my accent, you would realize that I'm probably from Southeast Asia, which I am. I was actually brought up in Singapore, right? But of course, I went basically all over the world, and I eventually ended up in Hong Kong about 10 years back, right? But I still work quite closely with the universities and the ministries in Singapore and of course in Southeast Asia and parts of South Asia. For the Central Asia, the only country that I am working with actually right now on teacher professional development as well is Uzbekistan, right? But I'm quite sure their education system within Central Asia is quite different as well, right? So like I would probably start my lecture right now since I think the majority of the participants are in. Right. Think I would probably start this particular session by looking at the issues and challenges in the education sector, right? May it be may it be the early childhood education or may it be the higher education, right? If you actually look at the challenges of the education sector, it faces 3 key category of issues, right? One is equity, second is quality, and like thirdly is efficiency, right? When we are looking at SDG for Education 2030, right, we are actually looking at inclusive and quality education and lifelong learning for all, right? So the whole notion of equity, quality, and efficiency is actually very much embedded in Education 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goal 4, right, by the United Nations, right? So when I talk about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the education sector, right? The issues that I'm going to raise are actually issues that are already there pre-pandemic, right? But the thing is, due to the pandemic itself, I think it really highlighted some of the very pertinent issues with respect to equity, quality, and efficiency, right? So, like, let me just go through the key issues, right? I think when we look at the pandemic, right, you could see that, it's like uh, the students in schools are being deprived of going into schools in the physical sense. So a lot of the teaching and learning are actually taking place either via the internet or via some sort of a remote and distance learning mode, right? But the thing is, we need to be aware that even if we are looking at students in the city or learners in the cities, there is always some students, or in some situation, the majority of the students, they do not have access or very limited access to infrastructure, devices, and resources, right? We could see government responding uh, by not just providing online learning, but also providing access to television, radio, etc. Right? So due to that limited access to infrastructure, I think it really uh, lead to the challenge of equity or inclusivity. The next one is the lack of teaching materials tailored to students from vulnerable groups. So when I look at the vulnerable groups, I think they include the students with disabilities, right? When they are learning remotely, there might not be teaching materials that actually cater to their needs or to their special needs, right? When they are actually learning from home. And of course, there are the students from the minority groups as well, the minority ethnic groups that might have issues with the language, right? So again, they might be deprived of teaching material that they are able to make sense of, right? And of course, the lack of teaching materials going out to students that do not have any access to devices or infrastructure, right? So that is again an equity issue. Uh, the third one is the lack of the support to vulnerable students and their families. So again, uh, like quite often, a lot of the students, they are stuck like back home. And that is always quite a big impact in terms of gender, in terms of girls, whereby the female members of the household might be expected to like babysit their younger siblings or be engaged in some sort of a household chore. So again, it leads to this whole notion of learning loss, compromising both equity and quality. The need to reconsider the modes of assessment, I think like this is really big. If you look at across the globe, not just in the countries that are represented in this workshop itself, right? I think you have quite a lot of high stake examinations, either cancelled or postponed. So again, the need to rethink alternative modes of assessment, right? Maybe even moving more towards school-based assessment or more towards formative assessment. And of course, if we are looking at the higher education sector especially, right, you could see that there is quite a transforming economy. There are emerging industries that have popped up right during the pandemic, and the like the demands for the competencies that's required to fill such industries are quite a challenge as well, right? So again, like being able to develop a relevant curriculum that is able to address the needs of the industries, right? So the whole notion of the future shape of the workforce post-pandemic. I think at the K to 12 level, at the primary school, at the secondary school, pre-pandemic, we are already talking about the importance of 21st century competencies, right? The need to be problem solver, the need to be like team workers, the need to be critical thinkers, the need to be lifelong learners, right? I think the pandemic have also like brought forth the importance of the need to be resilient as well, and the need to be learning for life. So again, like how do we ensure that this set of competencies is being brought into the curriculum that is going to be used within our early childhood education sector, our primary school sector, our high school sector, our TVET sector, as well as our higher education sector. Right. I think when we look at the issues of equity, quality, and efficiency, in the pandemic, it really have highlighted the pivotal role of the teachers. And in this case, when it comes to access and when it comes to quality, right, I think we need to be aware that teachers have a big role to play in order to ensure quality remote teaching and learning, right? I'm quite sure you have been to seminars and conferences pre-pandemic where they have highlighted the importance of teacher capacity, the teacher competencies, teacher professional development. But I think during the pandemic, and if we like move forward beyond this disruption, the whole notion of teacher capacity is really going to be really crucial, especially with respect to quality remote teaching and learning. It need not necessarily be just online learning. It could be like learning with the mass media of television or radio, right? And it will quite likely be not just remote teaching and learning, because most teaching and learning post-pandemic would still be taking place within a physical learning environment context, right? But the thing is, there need to be some components of online, some components of remote teaching and learning to be able to supplement the physical teaching and learning, right? So I think what the pandemic have definitely highlighted is the pivotal role of the teachers in quality remote teaching and learning, right? So the aim of this session, right, is to be able to address that pivotal role, right, to be able to enhance the capacity of teachers to be able to engage in quality teaching and learning, right, especially remote and blended teaching and learning, right? So how do we develop a teacher professional development program that is inclusive and is of quality, right? We need to be aware that it's always a constant challenge, right, to actually deliver quality teacher professional development. But the thing is, at times, even if we could deliver quality teacher professional development, it's quite difficult to do that teacher professional development at scale, right? So that's why I brought in the term inclusive, right? To ensure that even teachers from the rural and remote area, or female teachers, or teachers who are not employed by the government schools are all being exposed, are all being able to engage in teacher professional development. Right, okay, I would probably start off with this first when we talk about teacher professional development. And after this slide, I would actually be opening it up for questions. Right, so when we are looking at teacher professional development, we must be very clear about what do you expect teachers to be able to do, right? You could not just have teacher professional development uh, like irregardless of teacher competencies. So before teacher professional development, before developing a teacher professional development program, I think we need to be very upfront about what are the teacher competencies that are needed for remote and blended teaching and learning, right? So with this slide, I'm going to be showing you another 2 or 3 slides of the different models of teacher competencies, right? And it may give you some ideas of how we could develop a teacher competency framework for remote and blended teaching and learning, or teacher competencies for ICT in teaching and learning, right? So when we are looking at such competencies, right, I think we would be expecting that our teachers are able to analyze the context. The context would include the learning environments that they are teaching in and their student learning needs, but the context would also include the curriculum that the teachers are teaching in, uh, in their classrooms, in their school, with the students that they are working with, right? So they must be able to analyze the context and the needs. Next, they must be able to design and implement lessons, right? That actually are able to demonstrate quality remote and blended learning, uh, um, the the quality remote and blended learning lessons, right? So they must be able to design, but as they are designing these lessons, it is quite likely that they would be drawing upon resources. So we might expect them to be able to develop learning resources, but I think quite often we also expect them to be able to search for relevant learning resources that they can then bring into the classroom, right? Because not all teaching and learning resources would be developed solely by the teachers, right? I think on top of that, one big experience of the pandemic is really be able to provide the students with the psychosocial support as well, right? Not just the cognitive support, but as they are going through the tough times, as they are learning remotely, how do we provide them with not just the learning support, but also like the psychosocial support, right? Um, the fifth one, to manage and evaluate remote blended teaching and learning. So after they have implemented it, right, they must be able to evaluate, because by evaluating their own lesson, then they could improve for future lessons, right? And I think the last one is really important. It is about assessment. How do you plan and implement assessment remotely or in the blended form? And that would be a set of competencies that we would require from our teachers, which means that this set of competencies would form part of our teacher competency framework that would then inform our teacher professional development program, right? I think if you take a look at the slide deck, I have actually shown you 3 possible models, 3 very commonly used models. The first one is called the TPEG model, right? If you are going to just do a Google search on TPEG, you'll come across a lot of articles on TPEG, right? Where you're not just looking at technologies, right? But you're looking at technology and pedagogy in the context of the subject, right? Or the content, right? So this would be one type of framework that you might want to draw upon as you're coming up with the competencies, right? We call that the TPEG, technological, pedagogical, content knowledge, right? Um, the next one, which is done by the International Society of Technology in Education, they came up with a set of teacher competencies, right? So again, if you go to their website, ISTE.org, again, you would be able to see a set of competency standards that is expected of teachers, right? The next one, which is used very globally, for those who have gone for a UNESCO workshop or UNESCO seminar, you would have come across this, which is um, the so-called uh, the uh, teacher competency framework with respect to ICT in education. So this is actually developed by UNESCO, right, with different agencies and corporations, right? When they actually first launched it in 2007 and 8, but over the last few years, they have been revising it and fine tuning it, right? So so if you need any reference uh, to this set of competencies, you can actually look at different models here. Uh, I used to be working in Australia, and I was actually involved in the National Pre-Service Teacher ICT in Education Competencies project, right, involving all universities in Australia. And like what we did was we were using a mixture of TPEC, right, as well as the UNESCO ICT in Education Competency Framework for Teachers, right? So like after the workshop, over the next few weeks, you can just like go through these different models for teacher competencies, because these are the models that would inform the way you develop your competencies, that would then inform the way you design your teacher professional development. Okay, I would pause here. Do you have any questions?
So, Lim,
Yes.
do you hear me? Yes, please.
Yep, it's good.
How can I assess remotely? What is the ways of assessing remotely?
Okay, when I am talking about remotely, it is not just uh, like through the internet or through a data plan. I think accessing remotely would also include, you know, it's like the access to teaching and learning resources or teaching and learning lessons that are being done through television. So if you actually look at the examples across the world, just for example, in Cambodia, I think especially in the primary school, they have quite a number of television programs that are being done for primary school students, and for the schools to be referring their primary school students to as they are working through the teaching and learning resources based on the national curriculum, right? And in some instances, especially in the more remote area, just like in some parts of Nepal itself, they actually rely on the radio, right? And in some really very remote situation, like in Indonesia, Papua, right? Like the highlands of Papua, they might be actually relying on using a land phone, like speaking to the parents and assigning the parents to assign their students tasks. So when we look at the remote, I think it is quite a range. At times, if technologies fail and technologies could not get to the students, it might also include preparing hard copies and then getting parents to come to the school to collect those hard copies or posting that to the student's house as they work through the material. So when I look at the remote, I think it is a wide range, right? From very internet based, right to very hard copy based. But of course, in the ideal situation, we do hope that we could get as many students as possible, right, to be able to access the material through the internet. But as what we know too, at times it's just impossible, right, to get the students or their parents to pay for the data plan to be able to access those materials itself, right? So this would be what I'm actually mean by like remotely.
Okay, Limbs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you clarify a little bit more about point number 5 and number 6, managing, evaluating, and planning for implementing assessment? How these two different?
Okay. When we are doing an evaluation, I think it need not be a formal evaluation, but after a teacher have, let's say, taught a class, right? We must ensure that the teachers are able to reflect what he and she has taught in class, right? So they might want to get the feedback of the students in terms of, oh, you know, it's like did I prepare too much like material? Like were you able to access all the resources that I put online? Were there some issues that you have experienced when you access some of the resources? So that would be evaluating, right? Means you're evaluating the lesson. But when we are looking at assessment, you're interested in assessing the students' learning, right? Whether assessing them of what they have learned, right? Or assessing them for learning. So when we are looking at planning and implementing assessment, right? It might be, let's say, like maybe giving them a quiz at the end of the 30-minute lesson or at the end of the 45 minutes lesson, whereby the students can work through the quiz of the topic that they have just gone through, right? That might be implementing assessment in a remote or blended way, right? Where we constantly try to be able to see whether students have achieved the expected learning outcomes. Right? Okay, cool. Okay, I think what I would do is I would carry on first, right? And then after that, if you have like more questions, you probably can ask later on, right? So because this is just a 2-hour session. Okay, I actually see that one of you have raised your hands. Okay, maybe you can ask after the session itself, right? Okay, so as this is just a 2-hour session, I would say that I would be actually just going through some of the key models, right? If you want to get into more details, you could always either one, search for the documents yourself, because basically all these documents that, all these models that I'm showing you, they could be accessed through open source, right? Right. So they are all open access documents that you could access to, right? Either from the UNESCO through the UNESCO website, or through the TPEC website, or through the ISTE website. Okay, next we have dealt with teacher competencies, right? We are clear about what type of teacher competencies do we want to develop in our teachers, right? Next would be, how then are we going to build their capacity for these competencies? So this would be where teacher professional development would come in, right? And it is something that we would want to be thinking through during this session. How can we actually design a teacher professional development program that is inclusive, that is of quality, that is able to develop those competencies that we want to develop, right? So when we look at teacher professional development, I have provided you with some definition here. I think just now when I chatted with you, or quite informally, I think it's quite clear that teacher professional development is not one-off. It's not just during the pre-service stage. It's not just a one-off workshop, right? But it is a continuous process where you have regular opportunities to engage in growth and development within the teaching profession. And in this situation, we are looking at competencies for quality remote and blended teaching and learning, right? So there are activities that develop individual skills, knowledge, expertise, and other characteristics as a teacher. And quite often it is continuous, it is long-term, it is throughout the lifetime of our teachers, right? Especially when we look at sustainable development goal 4, inclusive and quality education and lifelong learning for all. If we expect to be developing our students to be lifelong learners, then I think our teachers in the first place have got to be lifelong learners. Yeah. Right. And for those of you in the teacher training colleges and working with teachers, you would know that for there to be quality teacher professional development, for teacher professional development to be effective. When I'm talking about effective, it's not just the teacher being able to understand the theory part of the professional development, that the teachers feel excited about developing the competencies, but it is for teachers to be able to apply the competencies that they have learned to their own classrooms when they go back to their school after the teacher professional development. So what is good teacher professional development? It got to be content focused. Means you have got to ensure that that professional development would be able to make sense to a math teacher, to a science teacher, to a Chinese teacher, to a Khmer teacher, right? Where they could see whatever that they are learning to be able to apply within their subject area, right? It must involve active learning. There must be collaboration. There must be a lot of coaching and expert support. There must be feedback, and quite often it's over a sustained period of time. It means it cannot be one-off, right? It cannot be just a 2-hour session whereby everybody come together, hee ha ha, in a hotel room or like a hotel ballroom, get excited about the different ideas, but when they go back, they may not apply it, right? So we want it to be in a sustained, like within a sustained duration. Okay, so we know what quality teacher professional development is, but if we look at the countries that are represented here, like we have got a smaller country like Laos PDR, right, with less teachers, but we have got a huge country like Bangladesh, right, with more than 1 million teachers, right? So again, like how could we reach out to teachers at scale? It is probably quite easy to be working with 10, 15 teachers, just like my session here. There are like less than 20 of you, right? I could be asking you questions, you could be asking me questions, we could have sustained conversation. But when you're doing at scale, how do you do it at scale, right? So what we have constantly been thinking about in quite a lot of initiative that we are working on, as well as our engagement with the Asian Development Bank, is how do we use technologies, right, to conduct our professional development in such a way that we could deliver quality professional development to as many teachers as possible, right? So that is actually one of the key challenges that we have, right? So we want to be able to envision teacher professional development as something that is of quality, that is able to reach out to as many teachers as possible, irregardless of their location, irregardless of their gender or ethnicity, right? Or they might be teachers serving refugees, right? So we want to be able to reach out to as many teachers as possible, right? Drawing upon the idea of quality teacher professional development, being aware of the challenges that we face, right, in developing countries and emerging countries, but yet drawing upon technologies to be able to deliver it at scale. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a few examples, right, from China right through to India, Philippines, and Indonesia, just to give you a sense of the different types of quality teacher professional development that are inclusive, right? And then I would try to then tease out what are the commonalities across all these different models, right? I'm quite sure that the participants here, you would have heard of this term called MOOC, right? Or massive open online courses. Yeah, MOOCs, right? So in 2016, the Peking University in Beijing, China, right? They actually like started a project in the ELLN Center where they try to reach out to the teachers who are serving in the remote and rural schools, right, in China, right? So, you know, it's like in China is huge. We have got more than a population of 1 billion people, right? And it's not that all schools are based in cities, right? Some schools and like, in fact, more than half the schools are actually based in the more rural areas, especially primary school. So the big concern is how do we ensure that the teachers there would have access to professional development, right? So they actually make use of massive open online courses to run in-service teacher professional development with these teachers. In 2016, they actually started working with 10,000 teachers, right, in the rural and remote area. And they actually have all interactions within the internet, right? So all the exchanges, the discussion, the resources are all put onto the internet, and all resources are being developed by the Peking University, which is one of the top universities in China, right? But I think is what is very interesting about this particular model is that although Peking University did this, or their plan was actually just to use the internet initially, but what they realized is a lot of teachers who are undergoing the courses, they come together informally, right? Like either in their school or across schools. They would meet on a regular basis once in 2 weeks or once a month to discuss what they have learned online, right? And they started to form smaller groups of professional learning communities through the social media, right? In China, they are using like something which is very similar to WhatsApp and Telegram. They call it WeChat, right? Where they get together in groups to discuss what they have learned. So since 2018, what this particular initiative have done is they have now built formal professional learning communities within the MOOCs, whereby teachers could discuss what they have learned in the massive open online course, right, with their colleagues within the school and across schools within the district itself. So this is the case of China, right, which is Northeast Asia. The next two examples are actually really interesting. They are both from India, right? Again, dealing with large numbers of students, large numbers of teachers within a particular state, right? So this is teacher education through school-based support India. So if you take a look at this model, what you would realize, I think I should bring the screen a bit more here so that I would not be distracting you. Right, so if you actually take a look at this model itself, the teachers would first undergo guided independent learning. So they will be going through the courses in the teacher professional development program, either within their school if they do not have internet access at home, right? Or in the cases of some schools that do not have internet access at all, right? They might have actually a education officer from the district level that go into the school to conduct the professional development with the materials being used on the online course, right, in a face-to-face situation. And again, just like the Chinese case, they set up professional development, they set up professional learning community using social media, may it be Facebook, or may it be WhatsApp or Twitter, right, where they come together in smaller groups to learn. In some situation where they do not have access to devices, they might come together in the physical sense, right? So this is teacher education through school-based support, which we call TESS India. This is especially interesting because in this teacher professional development program, they did not just rely on professional learning community and massive open online courses. They also ensure that the teachers are expected to apply what they have learned and reflect upon what they have learned and apply it to the classrooms, right? So to take a look at this model itself, they first start with a face-to-face training session or a face-to-face teacher professional development session, followed by online, right? So in this case here, TESS India, right, an institute in India, or TESS India, the Tata Institute in India and MIT in the US, they were working on the professional development courses on the edX platform, right? After the face-to-face session, they are expected to go through this course independently themselves, totally online, and eventually they're expected to apply what they have learned online, right? And once they have applied online, they are supposed to come together in smaller groups in a professional learning community to share what they have applied and what they have learned, right? Before they go back to the teacher professional development course again. So in this case, that is the application of what they have learned, right? So this would be Clicks India. Okay, this one actually involved 340,000 early childhood and literacy teachers in the Philippines, right? Where they actually prepare a courseware because the Philippines is made up of different islands, right? Which means that internet access is quite a challenge. So in order to do away with the internet, they actually just prepare a courseware, right? That could be accessed through a USB or could be accessed through a CD-ROM, whereby the teachers would be working through it independently on their devices, quite often in school, or in some cases where they have their own laptops, they might be working at home, right? But what is really interesting is an education officer from the district would serve as the facilitator to bring together small groups of teachers to actually discuss what they have learned and apply what they have learned, right? So we call them learning action cell, right? Because it is not just learning from the course, but they are expected to apply what they have learned. So learning action cell, and in each learning action cell, there is a facilitator who is from the district education office that would be running it. Um, this this particular teacher professional development program started in 2015 as a pilot by USAID, right, with a foundation in the Philippines. It started with just 4,000 teachers, but through the evaluation, etc., now it is being taken up by the Department of Education or the Ministry of Education in the Philippines, and it is now reaching out to 340,000 early literacy and numeracy teachers in the Philippines. And in fact, they are using this model to be working with teachers in preparation for school reopening remotely, right? So they're actually training teachers now, right, to teach remotely due to the pandemic using this particular model itself, right? So this is ELLN, Digital Philippines, or Early Literacy and Numeracy Digital Philippines, right? And the last model that I'm going to share with you is from Indonesia, right? So the Indonesian education system is decentralized, right? That means the budget holder of the schools in a particular regency is actually held by the regency, right? So all teacher professional development is often run at the regency level. Of course, there are also professional development that is run at the national level as well as the provincial level, but the majority of the teacher professional development is being run at the regency level, which is one level above the district level, right? So in this one here, like we are actually working very closely with the largest education foundation in Indonesia called the Putra Sampurna Foundation, right? Whereby they started out a teacher learning center, right, within each regency. Basically each regency, the teacher learning center would be serving between 15,000 teachers to 20,000 teachers, right? And they would then buy out about 50% of the time of the master teachers from schools to develop teacher professional development program, right? And a lot of the teacher professional development program are actually conducted in a blended mode. That means there's a face-to-face component and there's also the online component. They are using the platform called Schoology, right, whereby the teachers could access the resources or could access the discussion through Schoology, which is very much like like a learning management system. But of course, they rely a lot on the so-called social media as well, from Facebook, WhatsApp, especially in Telegram now, because they realize that Telegram can actually support a much larger group of teachers engaging in a conversation, right? So the Teacher Learning Center is actually run by teachers within the regency together with the education officers, right? Running teacher professional development courses that are then made available for teachers within the regency, right? And using a suite of different social media applications as well as a learning management system to deliver the teacher professional development itself. Okay, so I have shared with you 5 different models of teacher professional development at scale. of how do we ensure inclusive and quality teacher professional development without actually putting a big dent on the budget of professional development of either the government agency or of the state agencies, right? So I would pause here for questions.
Thanks, Ling, for
Yeah.
your comprehensive and innovative presentation. The model, we need to understand it. I need time to understand on the model because the model are not so easy to understand from my side.
Yeah.
So, do you have any model from Bangladesh?
Oh, we do not have any model for no, because we were just able to come up with the models based on the different agencies that we are working with. So we have got this coalition that we started out in at the end of 2018. It's called the Teacher Professional Development at Scale for the Global South, like coalition, right? So we have got a like a suite of different government agencies right through to NGOs and also international organizations that are part of this coalition. So just for example, the US AID, UK AID, they're all part of this coalition. So we were just able to actually develop these models based on the different agencies and local governments that we are working with, right? So I do not have a model for Bangladesh, right? Because I have not really like studied it in depth, right? But the thing is, if you are going onto the website called TPD at Scale Coalition, you'll be able to see some of these models that I am presenting here. But and if you can't find it, you can always contact me via my email, which I will pass you like later on.
Okay, I will try. But in Bangladesh, I think so far I see and understand, it's totally different because Bangladesh, the education is conducted by two ministry, different ministry. For primary and the pre-primary education, we have ministry. Its name is Minister of Primary and Mass Education. They are responsible for pre-primary education and primary education up to class 5. Up to class 6 to higher education, we have Minister of Education.
Mhm.
It's totally different.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
secondary education, we have 14, 1/4 government teachers training colleges and near about 80 private teachers training colleges. And many universities, they have IER, Institute of Education and Research. They provide diploma in education. And in the primary education, they have PTI, primary,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
they have on organizing body, name is on person from their Mr. Mazhar, National Academy for Primary Education. But in secondary education, there is no organization like NAEP. So our teacher development program, I think from my side, is not organized. Somehow there is a mismatching. The ministry support us, and there are two authority controlled us. I am from Teachers Training College. From my job, I am controlled by Minister of Education.
That's right. That's
But
right.
the curriculum is conducted by National University. So we follow the curriculum of National University, taking exam and evaluate student and result published by the National University.
Yeah.
But for my job, I am responsible and I am just conducted by the Minister of Education.
Right. Right.
So we need a body who can organize, who can manage, who has linkage our teacher development.
That's
I
right.
think there is a mismatch.
Yeah.
from my side.
I'm actually quite like aware of the Bangladesh context as well, because like one of the one of the TPD initiative that we were engaged on some like discussion. It was actually run by the Prime Minister's office as well, right? With the like Ministry of Secondary Education. So I do like agree that it's quite like complex, but I think we can always have that conversation like offline, like after this session itself. And yeah, so I could be sharing with you more like context specific examples that I've actually come across.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think I would like move on again in the interest of time. Then we could have maybe 2 or 3 more questions after this particular like presentation. Okay, so when we look at the 5 different models, these are the elements that we were able to tease out. Okay, when I say this, when I say like we, there's actually a coalition, as what I said, the TPD Scale like coalition, which Dr. Prajesh is actually our like one of the member of the advisory board, right? Like we, about 30 organizations, we actually came up with these different elements based on the different models that we have seen. I think one is quite important, that there is professional learning resources that could be used by teachers, right? So it could not be each teacher educator preparing their own professional learning resources. It would be ideal that either at the state level, at the district level, there would be shared quality professional learning resources that is available or that are available via the internet, where it could be used for different professional development courses. That would be ideal, right? The next one would be with respect to the teacher professional development curriculum and assessment. With respect to the curriculum, I have already highlighted, it is very important that you must be aware of what competencies are you trying to develop, right? So a teacher competency framework would be an ideal starting point with respect to the type of competencies, because the competencies will then inform the teacher professional development curriculum. And of course, the assessment of it. The really big challenge that we constantly have for teacher professional development is the teacher professional development, how successful it is, sometimes from the national point of view, is how many teachers have completed the program, right? Rather than what is the impact of the program on students' learning, right? So it is a constant struggle that we have, right? When we take a look at some of the models, like the one in the Philippines, where there is the expectation that teachers are supposed to apply what they have learned and provide feedback as well as sharing of what they have learned into their classroom, then maybe like the assessment of the impact is actually quite well done. But I think in most cases, it's a lot about completion, right? I think the third point is really key: professional learning community, right? Teachers learn best when they are learning with their peers. They do not learn well when they are learning independently without any conversation. And when I say peers, ideally peers that are working with them, peers who are working in the same subject area, peers who are teaching the same grade level. I think that professional learning community is important. It can be small, it can be 5 teachers from the same schools coming together to engage in the discussion of what they have learned. It could be big, right? Let's say 200-300 science teacher coming together to learn, right, in the Telegram group, for example, right? But there need to be a community to support that professional learning. Okay, fourth, the facilitators and the mentors are quite crucial. I think the best example is actually the one done at the national level by the Philippines, whereby the facilitators are well trained to be able to facilitate the professional learning community that in the Philippines they call it Learning Action Cell, right? And there is that expectation that teachers got to meet every month, come together to not just learn, but to share what they have applied in their classrooms, right? And the role of the facilitator is really crucial. Fifth point is the support of schools, local governments, national governments. I think it is quite crucial, right? I think especially when it comes to professional development, whether schools are willing to let their teachers go for professional development during school time, right? I think it may not apply to all schools. In some situations, we see that professional development are being conducted during weekends only, right? And at times during the weekends, though female teachers may make up the larger percentage of teachers in schools, but during the professional development program, right, this like weekend courses usually have a very low female teachers turnout, right? Because of that so-called gender expectation that if you are a female teacher, you're expected to be a mother at home, cooking and taking care of your kids at home, while the male teachers are like would be able to go for that professional development itself. So I think the support of the schools is really important, right? That's like the support of the local government, as what we could see, especially in Indonesia, India, and the Philippines, is really important, whereby the facilitators in the Philippines of the professional learning community are actually from the district offices, right? The district education officers. And of course, the partnership of the key stakeholders, right? And that partnership must be a sustained partnership. The example in the Philippines, right? The key stakeholders is actually the Department of Education in the Philippines, but they also drew a lot on non-government organizations, right? Like foundations. They work very closely with the local government. They work very closely with the professional development agency within the Department of Education. And they also work with universities that co-develop the professional learning resources with them. So this are what we see as the key elements of inclusive and quality teacher professional development. Right, just to quickly round up, because I'm aware of the time as well. Right, so think what I have focused on this session, right, is that I think the pandemic have highlighted key challenges for us in the education sector with regards to equity, quality, and efficiency. And we could see that in this pandemic, the role of the teacher is pivotal in delivering quality remote teaching and learning, right? So if the role of the teacher is pivotal, we need to ensure that they have the capacity to develop and to implement such quality remote teaching and learning. So that actually would bring forth the importance of teacher professional development and inclusive and quality teacher professional development, right? So I do hope that, you know, it's like you as teacher educators and policy makers in teacher education, right, may consider how TPD at scale, right, could be designed within your own context and implemented to build the capacity of the teachers for quality remote and blended teaching and learning, right? Because I think even post-pandemic, right, it is very likely that we need to be able to prepare teachers to be able to teach remotely as well, right? If and when there are disruptions, right? And a lot of the teaching and learning, I think even if we move beyond disruption, right, is going to be in a blended teaching and learning mode. So again, it is a set of competencies that we need to be able to develop in our teachers, right? So I would end my session here.